so excited to have our first ever Kingdom Builder Summit panel of great business leaders. Not only are they great business leaders, but great friends of Laura and I's. And so we were thinking, okay, what can we provide in this kind of uncommon season of having to move everything virtual? Well, I think the team has done a fantastic job on really creating moments, and we thought one of the best moments would be to capitalize on the wisdom of a diverse group of business leaders from around the country. And so our goal today really is to, if you can get one solid step, one good thing out of this session to apply to your life that would make a difference for you as a pastor or business leader. You know, business leaders aren't the only kingdom builders. It's really the relationship between a pastor and a business person. So I've got my great friends, and I'm going to introduce them, and then they're going to share a little bit of their story. And then I'm going to ask them some very pointed questions, guys. And so we're going to have fun. And there's no script. We may have notes, but anybody who knows me knows that I just may deviate from the script.
Amen.
And so over to my left, I've got my great friend Jerry Meek from Scottsdale, Arizona. Brett Lindsey from the great state of Ohio. And he may be a Buckeye fan. I don't know if he is
Absolutely.
or not. And then John Wright from Birmingham, Alabama. And so he and his wife, Sarah, are just great friends of ours as well. So, John, why don't you start off? You just share a little bit of your story, give our group here at the KB Summit, and then also we're going to be sending this out to pastors and leaders all over the country. So why don't you introduce yourself and then give a little bit of your story?
Yeah, Lee, thank you for having me this morning. Man, it's a privilege to be here with you guys. So I was born and raised in Macon, Georgia. Married my high school sweetheart, Sarah, who's here on the trip with us. We left the kids at home. Praise Jesus. I got 3 kids. This is the biggest test of the morning. I got a 6-year-old girl, a 9-year-old girl, and a 13-year-old son, and they're home with the grandparents. So we spent a few years in Georgia, got married right out of college, and had an entrepreneurial spirit from really an early age. Spent the first few years trying to find, what a business opportunity looked like for us, which ended up bringing us to Birmingham. Ended up at Church of the Highlands, where I met you. Yeah. That was in 2010. We ended up there. Found during the financial crisis, found 2 businesses that were failing, and were able to purchase the assets of both of them and just kind of mash them together. And from very humble beginnings, take a few employees and one landfill and a bunch of trucks and dumpsters.
So it was the waste business, right?
Yes,
it was
that's
waste
right.
Management.
Yep. So we grew that from a few employees to ultimately the largest privately held solid waste company in the Southeast. I sold that business in the summer of 2019 and got a new start.
I know some of that journey, and we're going to unpack a little bit of that because I think it can help a lot of people. Because I watched you, not only were you faithful, and you're faithful to your local church, and you're faithful just to the Lord, and I've watched that firsthand in your life, but also you're a prayer warrior. And John's like, when I was talking to him before, he's like, I just don't like really talking about myself. I don't want to. I said, your story, when you give away your life of what you've learned and what you've lived, it helps people tremendously. And so your story is really not for you. It's to give away. God's doing a great work in and through us to give our lives away, to impact others, right? He invested in 12, lost 1, but invested in 12 to go and change the world. And so I'm just really grateful for you, and we're glad you're here today.
Thank you.
Brett, why don't you unpack a little bit of, you don't talk too much about college football, but you can unpack a little bit of your Ohio story. We're lamenting as LSU fans.
So I am an avid Buckeyes fan. I have had the trifecta one time when it was the Big Ten championship, and then we went to the Sugar Bowl and beat Alabama, and then the national championship against Oregon. That was probably the best year of my life. I shouldn't say that. The best year of my life, obviously, is when I met my wife. So Teresa and I have been together. We started dating in Cleveland, met actually at a business event. I jotted down her name to myself and thought, I need to date that woman. Stalked her for a while. We ended up dating, ended up getting married, and we now have 5 kids together and a grandchild. Wow. So we have from 8, 18, 22, 27, 30. The oldest two are married and a granddaughter. So we have our hands full. I've been in the telecommunications space for 3 decades. It's what I started doing straight out of college. I had a mentor that I thought, man, that guy's got a great life. How do I emulate that? And he said, do these 3 things, and that's what I did. And so, fortunately, I think I've built a great business with a great story, with a lot of good people, and hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit more about that. But for us, Teresa's also a CEO, so we have an interesting dynamic in our house. We can have lots of conversations about EBITDA and things like that with other people might not know what I'm talking about. But it's been really great to watch kind of our relationship grow. And that has really blossomed with the help of Jim and Jennifer at Journey Church.
Wow.
We met them together. We found that church together. And I'm so blessed that we have found a way to get connected to the church through Jim and Jennifer, frankly, that brought us here. This experience over the last 3 years has just been unbelievable for us as a family, and something that we go home and talk to our kids about each time, and planning our family meeting and all the things that we talked about last year. So really appreciate being here.
No, that's awesome. Well, we're glad to have you, and we're going to unpack some of your guys' story. I remember the first year when y'all came here, and Jim's like, look, I got this business guy. I want to bring him, and I was like, man, bring him. And so just seeing, you guys, you came in to the first KB Summit, you're like, okay, what's going on here? Where am I at? What's going to happen? How long is this going to take? What are we doing here? And then really you guys just kind of went all in. And then last year, I just saw in you when we're unpacking some of the sessions and stuff, really you guys gleaning and leading in. And I bet some of the conversations with 2 CEOs in a marriage together can be kind of
it's fun. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, it's lively. All these type A personalities. That's great. Well, Jerry, you've been on some podcasts that we've done, and also during when COVID had came out, we did some stuff where you had shared with me, and you're just one of my closest friends, and just love you dearly, and so glad that you and Carol are here, and share with our family a little bit of your story.
Well, the most important thing is I met my wife Carol in high school, and we were friends. We never dated. There was nothing romantic on my side of it. And my mom, my little 5'4", now is 4'11" Italian mom, said, Jerry, have you ever thought about marrying Carol? I'm like, not really, Mom. And she goes, well, she's not always going to be there. I'm like, sure she will. And my mom like, Jer. So basically I said, Mom, she just doesn't smile. I said, I like to have fun. She goes, give her something to smile about. Wow. So Carol and I were married June 7th, and this past June, we celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary. We've got our youngest son, Jonathan, who's 30 in the construction industry. Our oldest son, Jeremy, turned 34 this year, and he got married in December. And what an amazing woman Yasmin is, and part of our family right now. And Lee, thank you again for participating in that ceremony. It was just...
Well, that was a high honor, and it was a beautiful wedding in Arizona, and his family is really special. Jeremy's a very, very gifted young man, and he, it was going to take someone like Yaz to be able to kind of equal out that, because he's strong. He's a brilliant guy, great leader. And it was a joy being able to be a part of their wedding.
Yeah, and he loved Uncle Lee's comments. Jeremy closed the deal. This is like 4 girlfriends ago.
Yeah. Like, man, what is wrong with you? He's like
34.
34, and we're talking, going back and forth, and he's like, man, he goes, this could be the one. I'm like, brother, close this deal, But hey, his patience paid off.
Oh, in a big way.
Tenfold.
And how a young person waiting and dedicating their life to Christ. Who would have known that her family fled from Iran when she was 3 years old, and that God would bring them to church together to meet?
Yeah.
And here she is. And Jeremy had this spreadsheet. It was, Helen of Troy, face it with launch 1,000 ships. He had the Millahelen scale. So he had these 64 things he was looking for in his wife. And I'm like, Jeremy, that's never going to happen. Get 2 or 3. Well, in the end, Yasmin is perfect for him.
Yeah.
And that's a blessing. So
tell us a little bit about your, because I know you and you breeze right through it. Tell us a little bit about the Desert Star Construction, a little bit about the business that you really started from basically from nothing really, and then grew into a very significant construction business?
So it was my dad and I that founded the business, and it was actually 43 years ago on Valentine's Day that my dad and I started with a skill saw and a cord. And we had $200 in assets, and we were going to change the world. Our first 20 years was painful. We made no money whatsoever, but we didn't quit. We were faithful to God. My first tithe check was $1.74, and I believed that if I started, God would honor it. I didn't think He was going to take that long in my life, but you know what? When you wait, you don't know what to do. You just do the next thing, and it wasn't without struggle. But I think what really happened to me, we started to see God moving, but it was through tragedy. It was through health issues, and I had to change the way I worked and what I was doing. And God took this business where my first 10 years, and I love Lee, he thinks more of me than I think of me. I said, Lee, my first 10 years in business, I said, what do you think I averaged a year? He says, oh, you had to make $100,000 a year. And my first 10 years average was $9,074 a year. I mean, I was big time the first 20 years when it was $19,000 a year. Well, that, you talk about in the Bible, the 100-fold return. We've seen thousands of fold return on what we've given into the kingdom and into our business. And what we started out as a carpentry company with a skill saw and a cord, God touched us. My dad made me president of the company at 27, and we grew it probably after 20 years, and it was about my ability to delegate, my ability to lead, my ability to do just what I was good at, instead of trying to do everything.
Yeah, I think that's a leader's trap. I think so many times we, especially as a founder, you want to have your hand on it, and it's pretty heavy-handed because and nobody has more to lose than you do, and you're all in. But it's the principle that the Bible talks about is, they call it the Jethro Principle, about how the art of delegation, and that's really an empowering of the leaders. I love my pastor, Pastor Chris, he really focused his life on pouring into people to raise up leaders. And that's how you get scale, impact, and you've done that over the years, and your business has, just skyrocketed. Some of the homes that you guys build are homes that are, these could be considered some out here starter homes, compared to...
We call that affordable housing.
Yeah, affordable housing at Beaver Creek, where we are, guys. And so I remember one time I was asking Jerry, I said, what are you building? And he goes, well, I can't tell you who it is. We got to be tight-lipped on that with our clients. It's all about confidentiality. And he's like, I said, well, can you give me kind of an idea? He goes, $75 million. And, he goes, and we were in Highlands Auditorium, the whole arena. And I was like, well, it's this square footage. He goes, yeah. He goes, we just built a house a little bit bigger than that. And I'm like, this is nuts. So, but what I love about you drive a pickup truck. You're very grounded. Family means a ton to you. Your relationships mean a ton to you. You're as all three of you, very open-handed, but also open-hearted. But how you care about people and raising people up, and whether they can do something for you or not. And I think there's been a direct correlation to the blessings of God on your life, to your faithfulness in that area. And I've watched it firsthand.
I agree with that, Leah. To think of us as, my first early years, and in 2019, we had $150 million of work in progress. And just so you know, I was praising Jesus and thanking God for all in this hand, and man, it was sheer terror over here. How am I going to do this? Yeah. And God made a way. He made a plan. He gave me wisdom. He brought the right people. And be careful what you pray on the 21-day fast. I had a sense in my company. So during that fast, I went and prayed over every desk, every chair in my office. Lord, just keep the right people here that you need. And if not, liberate them. Help them find their future. I did not expect 2 people to quit within a month. It was like, okay, be careful what you ask for, but it's the best thing that could have happened. I didn't have to have that stress. God took care of it. But I think what it is, what you say open-handed, is Jesus came to give, not to get. And I've adopted that philosophy from a young child. And I had people like you who came into my life at a very critical point in my life. I was struggling, and I read your book. It changed my life. It was, other than the Bible, probably one of the most impactful books I've ever read to this date. And It was amazing.
Some of it was God uses, people say, they see you on this side of the business, or they don't see you in the beginning years. They don't see you when, you're upside down, potential negative cash flow going, okay, how am I going to make this thing, how are we going to get this thing turned around? They see the accolades, or they see the victories, or what have you, the wins. But God doesn't waste anything. He really doesn't. He doesn't waste anything. And, I think God's positioning his church right now to be the answer. I mean, with all of what's going on, but business leaders have a key role, in that. John, I watched you as you navigated the sale of your business. We would have some in-depth conversations, and he goes, Lee, I know you sold a business before. Can I talk to you a little bit? And so we would navigate some of the issues. And what I saw you as you navigated, I want you to share some of that, or whatever you're comfortable sharing, because the principles which you stuck with of foundational, simple, trusting God, when your natural inkling would be, no, I need to take control of this and drive it home. I saw you live that, and you trusted God, and the outcome of that was not only the blessings of God, but what you brought into the future. Because however you leave something is really how you're going to start that next season of your life, and it could be good or bad. But Why don't you share some of that?
Yeah, Lee, I spent too many years early on trying to control everything that I touched. And it just leads to burnout, worn out, and it's like you say in your book, right? You're the champion of the 99-yard dash.
Yeah.
That last yard is it's tough. It's tough on your own, and
there's no medals for 99 yards.
No medals, and I learned the hard way that thinking that I may lose my business, maybe lose my marriage, lose things that were most important to me, that. What does success really mean? What does it really look like? You got to define that as a leader. And for me, it was like success equals obedience.
Wow. And,
that's really what carried me through selling the business. It's really what led me to sell the business was obedience. It wasn't that we were doing poorly and I needed to get out. It wasn't that it was going to be the best payday I could possibly get hanging around.
Yeah.
It was just, there was something. I knew that the Lord was leading me out of it. And along the way, we just continued to have things in that process that you're alluding to, details that I can't share, but that looked like everything was going to fall apart. And honestly, the deal for me just continued to get worse and worse. And finally, it was like, do we pull the plug and fight the fight for a little while longer and come back to the table again and probably make more money? Or do we stay faithful to what we know God's called us to do, which was to leave? And Sarah and I just decided that that's what we were going to do. And, it was tough. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it was tough. But I think God blessed it tremendously. People asked me once it was all over, it's like, do you miss it? Do you miss something you poured so much into? And I haven't missed it a day, not once. And it's funny because I think, God tells us that when we delight in him, he gives us the desires of our heart. And it was funny because when we started going down that road, I had no desires to sell. And throughout the process, I think when I finally just got to that point of surrender, like you're talking about, just open-handed, like, Lord, really all of this is yours.
Yeah.
When Sarah and I both got to that place, really that's when all the desires in my heart changed.
That's something that's what you just touched on at the end is I call the fullness of oneness. It's really when we pray with our, we're just praying by ourselves to the Lord. We're operating as married people. We're operating in half the strength. When we pray with our spouses, which for me early on was very awkward, because you pray before you go to bed, or you'd bless the food or whatever. But when it became super intentional, and some of it was through pain, it was like all we had was Jesus. We're like starting over. And it's like, we got to come in one accord. And there's a power that's in that. But what you just said is like, it didn't really fully click until you and Sarah got on the same page and y'all were in agreement, trusting God. Yeah, fear can be there. Yeah, all of these different emotions. But we make a choice. As Pastor Chris says, he says, what is it? Choices lead, feelings will follow.
That's right.
And you decided to make those choices. And not only did you guys became in one agreement, you actually... when you sold your business, you were faithful to your church. You were faithful to in being open-handed. And it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to actually write the check. You know, when I'd sold a business early on, it was like my mind starts running. I had half of it spent. And so it's like your mind's going, and I remember talking to my business partner who's with us this year at KB Summit, Chris Herndon, and Chris is a CFO. I called him CF No, because you know he kept everything. He kept the balance of powers there because I had a lot of vision, and so we're navigating through this. But I remember when we sold this one particular business, and it was like I need to write this check really fast because I'm going to start. I'm going to start thinking this thing through because this is a big number, and to God it's not.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes that when we have business sales or liquidity events or big wins, we start to qualify and we can almost become protective. Sure. And I would say to business leaders is, why does that blessing have to be all there is? Why can't that blessing that you think's a harvest is really just seed? It's really just the seed for more. And that God gives seed to the sower, absolutely, not seed to the reaper or the keeper. He gives seed to the sower. And so just appreciate your life and how you're one of the most solid guys that I know of, and just faithful. And I know how you love your family. He's got 3 beautiful kids, and they're just precious. So I'm just glad you're here. Brett, why don't you give I know you got a lot of stuff going on in your world right now, a lot of good stuff, and but why don't you unpack for our group a little bit of your story?
Sure. So 10 years ago, I was in Cleveland, had an opportunity to go to a small company, really small, 23 people. And I thought, I'm not really sure this is the right thing to do, but it was a good time for my family to do it, so I did. And over that 10-year period, we've grown from 23 people to 350 people. We've grown from a single network in Cleveland, Ohio, to 8 states. We grew our business through a private equity investment in 2015, through a group that I had worked with 3 times in the past. So the same private equity firm that I had history with came in, and we then did a series of acquisitions and sold the business in 2018. And it's one of those things where I think God speaks something into your head, and at that time, you're not sure whether it's coming from you or from him. And there's a point in time when you finally realize, okay, all these good ideas aren't just coming from me. There's an order to this, and there's a plan. And so I went to my investors and said, it's time to sell the business. We were only 3 years into a 5-year plan that we had, but we had already exceeded our 5-year plan. And they said, gosh, it's too early. And I said, no, it's not. What is the number that you want to sell the business for? And they said $300 million. And I said, okay. So we ran a process. We sold the business for $333 million. And I thought, okay, we've done exactly what I felt like we had been told to do. We sold our company to a new owner, and I really wasn't sure what to do. When you sell your business a lot of times and you stay on, it's kind of like a shotgun wedding. You go through this process, you sell them on your business,
Lord
you tell them all about
wisdom
it.
right there. Keep going. That's wisdom.
Tell them all about your business. Go to a couple dinners, and then they win the auction, and you're now theirs. And so you're a little scared trying to figure out how is this going to work. And so with AMP Capital, they were from Europe. They were this large infrastructure fund, but they had a lot of belief in us. And so, sometimes you have investors and they support you, everything you say, and other times they're kind of naysayers. And these guys were literally like, every time you think you have a good idea, we should talk. And so we've now done 5 more acquisitions. We're going to be closing on our 5th one in February, and we're bidding on another one. Our business has grown 10x from where it was in 2018. We're going to run another process this year, hopefully have another liquidity event, and sell our business for north of $2 billion.
That's awesome.
So we've continued to bring people into the business. But the thing that I think, for Teresa and I, we have this rhythm now where, and you made a great point about have talents, don't just stop. And so what we viewed it as, okay, well, these exits have been great and they've taken care of our family. I'm not ready to retire. I'm young. I'm 50. What are we going to do? And it became more about how do we keep growing these businesses so that we can have a larger impact. Yeah. And so we now have this window of time that we look at, go, okay, for the next 10 years, how hard can we work to deliver the most amount to be able to drive the growth in the kingdom in a way that I don't think I thought, I definitely was not thinking that beforehand. But since going through this process and really being here at these events, just getting an idea that it is okay to be a business person. Yeah. It's okay to make money. And frankly, that's what I'm good at doing. I'm good at leading businesses and having these events. And if that allows for us to give back even more, then all the better.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. so many times we think business is a dirty word, or business is tainted, or especially as a Christian, the closer you get to God, the more you look at what you do for a living. It's kind of like, okay, that's just a second seat. It's just a means to an end to have a balance sheet one day that I'll do something, or maybe I just go buy a beautiful home or homes, or go to beautiful places like Beaver Creek and hang out and just have a great retirement life. And there's nowhere in Scripture it talks about retirement. You know, the Hebrew language, the word retirement doesn't even translate to an actual word. And so I'm with you, is when you get this vision that God's really created you to go and create wealth. He's created you to make money, and so that you can live open-handed and make a difference. But generosity on itself is not enough. Generosity without guidance will make you bankrupt. And so it's like, where do I place this? Where do I invest this in the kingdom? You know, the local church, I see the local church, and I've said this to you guys, it's like a kingdom mutual fund. You can invest in one area and it impacts all these areas of, there's real estate involved, there's next generation, there's leadership, there's students, there's young people, there's local, national, and global initiatives. So you invest in one place, and then it has not only a physical return in impact, but it also impacts eternity, where we're going to see it, you know, in heaven. But that's fantastic. What would you say was kind of a defining moment with you and Jim, his pastor Jim Wilkes, who's with us? Jim and Jennifer, amazing family in Cleveland. He took me to a Browns game, and so he gets me these tickets. I went to your church and had a great time, and he's like, look, he goes, we're going to the dog pound at the Browns game. He's like, look, you got to understand, in the dog pound, you know, there's no Jesus in the dog pound. They're not screaming Jesus. No, they're not screaming Jesus. They were screaming everything else. And so when I saw a very young person share some things with me, I was like, oh my gosh, this is wild. It's kind of like an LSU game. But talk a little bit about, if you can, because I've watched how you and Jim's relationship has really gotten closer and closer, and how the way that you guys honor each other's gifting, and a little bit. Tell me a little bit about how that evolved and kind of where it's at today.
So I have to, the only reason that have a relationship with Jim is because of my wife. We started dating. I went to Christian college. I grew up in the Church of Christ. I had not been in a physical church for almost 25 years. Wow. Teresa and I started dating, and she said, hey, I think you're great, but if this is going anywhere, we have to go to church. I was like, okay.
Come on, Teresa.
I haven't been to church in a while, but let's do this. And she mentioned Journey, and I had passed Journey in Fairview Park a whole bunch of times. And so Teresa and I showed up and went. And the very first, usually the first or the second time we were there, it was Easter Sunday, and it was all about how they were going to have a special offering to give to other people outside of the church. And growing up where I had been, the church was the church. It was the preacher and the flock, and there was not much going outward. And that was part of my challenge. And so getting there and watching Jim and Jennifer have this vision on how we're going to bring people to Christ is by reaching out, not in. The people that we're trying to find aren't in the building, they're outside. And so Teresa then said, you know what, we need to go hang out with these guys. It's like, oh, okay, that sounds great, babe. And so I thought, well, let's take them to a basketball game, because then I don't have to talk that much necessarily. I can watch the game, we can have a little interaction, it'll be fine. But we ended up loving Jim and Jennifer and having a great relationship there. And they had so many things that they wanted to do. And so the way that it first happened was, we had a campus in Metro, which is in this Clark Fulton area, which is a very impoverished area of Cleveland. And they were talking about wanting to raise money to help put new churches. And obviously this is pre-COVID, and it was all about how do we plant these churches all around Northeast Ohio. And they needed $100,000 to get this church started. And I was talking to Teresa about it, and I said, this is what we're supposed to do. And we had been going there, I don't think, maybe 4 or 5 months. We weren't engaged yet. We weren't married, nothing. And so we went to, I guess sporting events are my way of making sure it's a conference. We went to an Indians game and sat and told Jim and Jen that, hey, we want to give the money for Journey, and then we want to make a commitment to help do that every year for the next 5 years, because you said we need to build 5 churches. And so that was kind of the dream at the time. What I think has really been great with Jim and I is I've watched my dreams continue to get surpassed. And so my challenge to Jim has been, you need to be dreaming bigger. Like how much more can we do? And he's always had this, I want to bring 10,000 people to Christ. So how do we get within 1 million people in Northeast Ohio? So, historically that's been through buildings. You go into these areas and you bring people. But COVID has changed that. And, now we're in this world of online and we've got, 7,500 people showing up to watch Journey on a Sunday. And so we just had a strategy session last week and it was, hey, Jim, the time is now. If we got 7,500 people online and your goal was 10,000, then let's put all the resources we can to get those 7,500 to Christ, and then let's figure out another dream. And so last week it was really fun to just kind of sit and say, these are all the things that are in your head. If you don't say them out loud and if you don't own them, they won't happen. I mean, that's good. For me in my business, if I won't say it to all my people and I won't own it, then it's not going to happen. Because if they don't see the dream and the vision from me, they're not going to put that same level of energy towards it. And I think it's the same thing in church. And so with Jim, Jim and Keith and I sat last week for 2 hours and it flew by. And we started originally talking about our legacy building for the year. It was like, guys, how about instead of talking about the calendar, what's the dream? What are we going to go tell people that we want to, give money into the legacy program? What do we want them to do? And that relationship has really, it's gotten me more excited about it. Look, if you ask me to be a greeter or lead a small group, I'm not your guy. But if you say, I need millions of dollars and I want to raise 10,000, that gets my juices flowing. That makes me excited about what's happening.
Well, you touched on something that I think is super important for every pastor to hear this. You're talking about vision, and a lot of times we'll see people compartmentalize the vision to what they think people can handle rather than give the whole vision for what God's told them to do. And I think business people, they're not looking at just today. They're like, okay, where are we headed with this and what's really the impact? I think that if pastors can communicate the entire vision to people now, you've got to be showing the wins and the tangible difference being made, because those wins of impact actually justify more new vision being done. And so ideally, if your campuses are winning, in other words, whatever metrics you're tracking, telling those stories of impact justifies more new campuses being done. That's kind of like our mindset in business. But you said something that was like where you and Jim have developed this friendship and this relationship, but you're honoring each other's gifting. God's created us all uniquely with spiritual gifts, but the way that he's honored you and you've honored him, but y'all have these discussions where you're somewhat even challenging him, man, dream bigger. And so I think every pastor listening right now needs guys like you guys, kingdom builders that have this mindset of saying, oh, no, come on, let's dream bigger, let's go for the fence. And that fires us up because God's hardwired us that way to be able to not only fund projects, but accelerate the vision of the church. So that's awesome. John, as you have, I know that you lead our legacy prayer team, and that's one of the foundational things at Church of the Highlands is our not only 21 days of prayer, which you just touched on, Jerry, earlier, and we do 21 days of prayer and fasting in January, and then 21 days of prayer and feasting in August. But we did 21 days of prayer and fasting this year due to the unique season, I guess, we were in. But I'm grateful for Pastor Chris and his discipline, because everything starts at that level is prayer. And so, but I want to ask you a question. You've been exposed to some of this, but why are you a kingdom builder?
I heard John Maxwell say at one of our legacy dinners one night, maybe a year ago, that when you can afford to quit, you can't afford to quit. And I think it's really tempting for business people to get to a point where they don't need any more and quit.
Yeah.
Because if there's no purpose behind it, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's what I'm good at. As you were saying just a minute ago, I love building businesses, love helping grow businesses, love fixing broken things, love casting vision for where we can go. Like those are things. Those are my hobbies. Like I enjoy that. But the price you pay for it is great, and the price that your family pays for it can be great. Yeah. And it's not worth it if it doesn't have an eternal impact.
Yeah. No, that's so good. It's the difference between legacy and dynasty. you know. And when you build a dynasty, it always costs you in some area of either health. You sacrifice something. Could be relationships, and we all know people. We've even probably, I know I have, in certain areas where it cost us to build that business or cost us in an area, and you look back on that, and there's usually when it's so focused on building that dynasty, there's collateral damage. You know, in that, and we've seen, I know, in whether it's partnerships or whether it's different dynamics that have happened where there's been some carnage posts. Isn't it amazing that people don't really care about too much until there's either no money or there's quite a bit of money. And so I call it getting amnesia, you know. But as you know, as being a kingdom builder, which you are at, you know, we call it at Highlands, it's our legacy team. Other churches call it kingdom builders. It's all synonymous. But you guys, it's legacy team at Journey Church. Jerry, you have, not that you're the eldest at this table, but you are the eldest
But
at this
I am.
table. But you have been faithful, very generous. What drives you as a kingdom builder?
I guess the biggest thing is for me, it gave me purpose and vision for not just this life, but for eternity. And it's that realization that it wasn't about me, but God wanted to use me. And I knew that God wants to be first.
Yeah.
And it's that discipline of giving. And it's like, that is the first thing we do. It's the first check we write. But I think what it does, it keeps my heart in place. Because for me, it reinforced the value of Christians in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And I think realistically, as believers, and I've said this to you before, we should be the most generous people on the world. Okay, wait, our sins were forgiven. God's adopted us into his family. And let's not forget about like eternity in heaven.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all like great rewards. And I don't mean that as a selfish thing. It's the investment into others. That's the great joy. My greatest vision, my greatest success in our business has been going from addition to multiplication. And the multiplication isn't necessarily dollars in net profits. And yeah, I always manage for profit, not cash flow. That might not be good business, but it's like, I want to know what I'm getting out of this work. If I'm paying the price, what's left at the end? But it's the ROI on our employees. It's always been people, then profits.
Yeah.
And that's how we built our organization. It's important.
Yes.
But now to focus on that eternal return on investment that you taught me, that's key. That's what it's all about.
You know, I remember when Pastor Chris, PC, he basically, that's what we call him. He said, this was one of the most powerful questions, the kind of life change for me, was when he said, is what you're giving to going to show up in heaven? Yeah. I never thought about it like that. It's like, is what you're giving your life to, your resources, your time to, is it going to show up in heaven? And I think that there's a lot of people who are generous. There's a lot of people who are giving to things, and they're noble. They're noble. I mean, to give to a university or a medical facility, those things are amazing and they're noble. But when your name got put on that building, that's your reward. It's not going to show up in heaven. And so it really kind of wrecked my philanthropic model. You know, it really did. So I'm thinking, you know, LSU purple and gold, God's got to be in it. And so it was like, no, that's not showing up in heaven. So my reward was those sideline passes. So you're not that anything's wrong with that, but the context of it was really, and that kind of birthed this whole e-ROI, eternal return on investment.
I'd like to piggyback what you just said, because that's the other part about being a kingdom builder. For Carol and I, when you taught us that, and when Pastor Chris, I was there when he asked that question and talked about his giving filter and all those things were powerful. Carol and I were like, wait a minute, we don't need that plaque at the Science Museum, and yeah, we've got these scholarships at a state universities, big #1 in the country universities. And I'm not a sports fan, so I don't really care who you guys root for. I don't have time for that, so I'm just putting that out there. But I think the thing is for us, and we just built a new home, as you got to visit a few years ago, every decision we made was, is the money we're spending worth it? If, say, we don't pay this much for our furniture, how many people can we feed in Haiti? Or how many victims of human trafficking, or how many homeless can we feed? It just changed the baseline. I don't think we give anything that's other than kingdom related now.
Yeah. So doing it all, and are you doing it Yes, the physical needs, but are you doing it in Jesus' name? So eventually, you can rescue 1,000 girls out of the sex trafficking, which is it would be an amazing thing, and we should do it. But if we withhold the greatest gift of all, which is salvation through Jesus, it's like, wow, we really missed. We really didn't succeed. We succeeded for a moment, and I think that's where the local church comes in. And, I've bought in, as you guys know, I've bought into the local church, really it being empowered. Or I heard this say, local church is the hope of the world. Then I heard it revised. The local church empowered is the hope of the world. Then pause right there. How does the local church then, you got to ask the question, how's the local church empowered? Well, raising up leaders, but it takes resources. So it's both the pastor and the business person working hand in hand. I say it this way. I think the destiny of a local church pastor and the destiny of a Christian business person, as it relates to the kingdom of God, is intertwined. And that's why I think this relationship, so the local church is never going to be empowered until this relationship really comes to pass. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it in our spheres of influence. God's giving ideas. God's giving favor. He's bringing, this last year, I've seen more of people that I know prosper in this environment tenfold. And it doesn't make any sense. I know churches that their giving has gone up. And you're just sitting there going, that's just amazing. But I just think that's the favor and the grace and the hand of God, But it's to be used for a purpose, right?
And it's in blessing order, Lee.
It's
in blessing order. I think, I said earlier that success for us equals obedience. And I think obedience starts, for my family, with order. And good. Kind of the turning point in our life, really where we started catching that kingdom vision, is when I heard you speak, and you spoke on not having the character to sustain the blessing God placed on your life. Yeah. And I remember the Lord speaking to me. He's like, John, that's your story. And it impacted me so deeply. I went back and told my team, and my wife's like, we got some business problems. We got some marriage problems. We got some problems. We got a character problem. And, as the leader, it starts with me. Wow. And so, I just dug in, which is really where I fell in love with prayer and, ended up serving in that capacity.
Well, isn't it what you just said, though? There's even an order to that. You fell in love with prayer because there are people, we're all called to pray, but there are people who are gifted. We're all called to be worshipers, there are people with a gift. We're all called to be generous, but there are people with that spiritual gift. And that's one of the things that we foster. We foster at Kingdom Builders and what the summit's really all about. We want to see pastors and business people come together because it really is. It's an exchange of trust both ways. It really is. If one has vision, they're trusting someone, bring them in their world, and churches have split when pastors and business people don't get along together. And I think it's such a critical covenant, really a covenant relationship that we're seeing come to pass. We're seeing thousands of churches where this is being done now in a healthy way, and we're seeing their church advance and people's lives change, and which is amazing.
Lee, that's a bit. I went to Refuge. I don't know if you guys have been there for the fly fishing trip, Refuge out of Montana.
No, I don't have an invitation, so if anybody listening is ahead of Refuge.
I don't even have a fishing.
Yeah. No, I'm teasing.
But the thing that I would comment on is, so we were out there, and this was all pastors, and it's a way to give back to pastors, get them out of their church, pour into them, and spend some time with them. And the saddest thing to me during that event was speaking to pastors who didn't have a business person in their church that they had a true relationship with, because they had been burned in the past and somebody had done what you just said, where they got sideways and that person left. And so, what would you want every pastor to know? You have to be just as open and trusting with the business person as you want them to be with you.
It's great.
And if you are not, as the pastor, going to be very open and transparent, then they're not going to be either. But to me, I guess it was just the thing that I hope that every business person knows too, that those pastors it's a stretch for them. They're asking for help in something that they're uncomfortable with, and they need you to help them through that. And then you, as the business person, are probably uncomfortable in understanding exactly how the church works and what's happening behind the scenes, and you need them to help you. But if you can get that trust between the two, it's a beautiful thing. But if you won't open up and do that, then your church is going to suffer.
Yeah, that's so on point. That's gold right there for every pastor and every business person. Because if your destinies are tied, Coach Mack told me one time, Bill McCartney, he says, Lee, he goes, this message really is God's called them, pastors and business people, he's called them not to compete against one another. He's called them to complete each other. But it takes time. It's a process. It is walking through. And a pastor doesn't have the bandwidth to have personal relationships with every single kingdom builder in their church. But the Bible says that we're to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. And so it's all about raising up leaders, constantly raising up leaders. And, John, you've heard me say this. It's like everybody needs an upstream and everybody needs a downstream. You get wisdom from your upstream, but then in order for you to be healthy, you need to give that wisdom away to a downstream. And again, giving your life away of what you've learned and what you've actually lived. Got to have both in that.
Yeah, Lee, you just hit on exactly what I would want every pastor to know, needing an upstream and a downstream. I think coming from a younger perspective, Jerry, no offense to you. So,
How old are you, by the way?
I'm 37.
37.
You're a child.
Thank you. Lee offered me chicken fingers last night.
Yeah, I did. That's the same. When we grabbed the dinner, I'm like, okay, we have the kids menu over there.
No, I think it's so important I think one of the biggest misconceptions about legacy and kingdom builders in general is that it's a club for the rich old guys. And, not forgetting that it's not about a number. It's not about it, Jerry, it's about your $1.74. It's about whatever you have that's above and beyond your tithe. Yeah. And, I think we've got to impress that on young people. Otherwise, they're going to learn it the hard way later in life.
Yeah. I heard someone say, when you're in your 20s, everything you live your life with ends with an exclamation point. Then when you get to your 30s, those exclamation points don't work anymore. They turn to question marks. And I think it was a mutual friend that sent me like a podcast. This was on, and I was like, man, that is brilliant and so true. And he said this. He says, if we don't connect these 30-somethings to try and help them. They're looking for margin now. They're trying to figure out life. Imagine if we could start cultivating legacy kingdom builders in their 20s, even as late teens, 20s and 30s, the impact they're going to make when they're 50, when they're however old you are. But when they're, it's going to be a significant impact. It's because they had that upstream pouring into them, and then they knew they needed to give their life away as well. Yeah. That's awesome. Jerry, before we close out, I'd love to get your thoughts, in just your experience of what would you want all of our pastors to know?
I guess I'd really encourage the pastors to start now. Today, who can I pray for? Who's right in front of me? Yeah. What gift is God putting at the house that they've missed? And I think right now is your destiny is tied to where you put your money, in my opinion. And it's like where your heart goes, you want people in your church, you need to have a vision that they can invest into, Lee. But what you want to do is, that stock or mutual fund that we all invest in, we follow it.
Yep.
We're concerned, how's it performing? Yep. What can we do to help? Give them something worthy to invest in, but make deposits into the people. Yeah. The business guys are hungry for purpose, and you know what? We want to be asked.
And I think the whole foundation of kingdom builders and legacy teams and at churches is really to create that ecosystem. So I'd encourage every pastor and every business person to create that ecosystem. We have serve teams and we have teams that serve in every area. But as it relates to really pouring into business people and allow them to plug and play at the speed of their world and really affirming them in the value of their calling. I know Jim and Jennifer do that with you guys. I know Pastor Chris does. It's like we affirm you in your calling Monday through Friday. And it's not a bad thing to go kick tail in the marketplace and then let's partner with the vision of the house and make it go faster. And I think that's at the very core. Kingdom builders and legacy team, it's not really about money. It's about helping people fulfill what God's created them to do, which is the mandate, I think, on all of us as Christians and specifically even pastors. And so we hope that you have enjoyed this. This is our first one. So I just appreciate you guys, all three of you, and just your stories and your faithfulness and how you're committed to your families and how you're committed to the Lord. And and just appreciate your friendship very, very much. And I don't take that for granted. And then we want to cultivate environments like this going forward. So I encourage each and every one of you that are watching this virtually here in Beaver Creek, I'd encourage you pastors to connect with Jerry, connect with John, connect with Brett during this week while we're together. And we've got some great surprises in store, and we look forward to experiencing the rest of the week with you. And then also we look forward to last night at the Vision Dinner. So love you. God bless you, and remember, your legacy starts today.